Now I must confess I don't really know why we're still here. Pretty much every character that matters has just been engulfed by a pyroclastic flow, the boiling toxic mass of gas and ash and rock in which temperatures are typically 700 degrees Celsius and can be as high as 1,000 degrees Celsius. Since Americans find small numbers boring to the extent that they find their objectively boring sports fascinating so long as you say that one goal is worth 17 points, that translates as a temperature range between 1500 and 1850 Fahrenheit. The only shelter available to anybody in the village are flimsy houses built of wood and of stone, with thatched roofs. In temperatures like these, the fat in human bodies will melt, your clothing will act like a wick, your own body fat will be the candle, your lungs will collapse, the water in your body will boil, you will be dead in a matter of seconds, your entire world will burn. And that's just accounting for the extreme temperatures. Mighty Morphed Power Elf was standing out in the open and got hit with the full force of the shockwave and then the pyroclastic flow itself. And she's an elf. Elves are quite obviously grass types and so weak to fire. But on top of the fire, the kinetic impact would have broken her body and the whole village would have been flattened. I include that detail because the only possible explanation for anybody surviving the fire component of this calamity, which is itself a comedic and meme explanation, is that evil fire is cold in Rings of Power. Look, here it is in episode 1, being very cold. It would be very funny if we were to pick up in episode 7 to find everybody turned into a human popsicle, but really we should be picking up in episode 7 in an obliterated hellscape with no survivors at all. Rip Mighty Morphed Power Elf, Elendil, Sailor Twink, Lieutenant Twunk, Queenie, and all the other wonderful and timeless characters that the show has given us. Like this guy, this one here, wasn't he such a guy? His name will go down in history, whatever it is. But I'm devastated to report that this is not so. Moreover, as the introductory recap reminds us, we've still got storylines happening, supposedly, over with the not hobbits, and with the dwarves, and with the elves. So even if everybody here were dead rather than surviving like the cockroaches they are, Rings of Power would still find a way to drag itself along like the cultural cockroach that it is. So we open up with Mighty Morphed Power Elf covered in volcanic ash. Long-term exposure to volcanic ash has been linked to all manner of cancers and lung diseases, so she probably has a future lying about catching one of them on the LolCow Live podcast. Just look at this complete and utter devastation all around her. Oh, by the way, her hair should probably be on fire as well. She should be cooking inside that plate armor, and yes, I am just listing ways for her to die horribly because she really fucking deserves it. There's a fucking fire horse. What a few days that poor thing's had. Craned onto a ship, collapsed like a folding chair, transported to a strange continent, ridden mercilessly and without rest for hour after hour, turned into some bizarre mobile clothesline for orcs, hit by a volcano, and now set alight. I guess from this we learn that in the world of Rings of Power, horses are more flammable than elves, but I don't think that's something the show meant to establish. Not sure it's a mechanic we'll be coming back to. Mighty Morphed Power Elf sees many corpses littering the ground, but not everybody is dead as the moans and the groans and the screams and the coughing begin to filter in over the white noise. She ignores those, though, because they aren't coming from main characters, so they don't matter. It's only when she hears angry Floorboy calling out for Nameless Wench, his mother, that she decides to try and help somebody. While it's painfully obvious that these two are being stuck together because they are indeed main characters, this is pretty much the first time we see Mighty Morphed Power Elf actually showing care for anybody around her. Yes, it's the penultimate episode, and they've only now got around to trying to humanize their primary anchor being, but better late than never, right? These two are about to go on a journey together. It will be a short journey because, as mentioned, we are in the penultimate episode, but it's not a terrible idea. The moral of this journey is essentially overcoming grief and guilt, instilling the courage to carry on in service of noble ends, letting go of the fight that defines you, and so on. The aim is, in part, for Mighty Morphed Power Elf to emerge a more rounded character, but the one meant to go on the biggest journey is Angry Floorboy, you would think. He's young, he's afraid, he thinks he's lost his entire world, and he thinks it's all his fault for some reason. Under Mighty Morphed Power Elf's guidance, he gets a more practical demonstration of the lesson his mother stole from Betterworks. The shadow is a small and passing thing. But it now seems redundant even laying all this out because of what's coming in Season 2. His mini-arc in this episode comes to a close with the eventual discovery that his mother is alive and well, and so his courage and forbearance bears fruit. He is set up to enter Season 2 as a young man, not a boy, a wiser younger and more experienced soldier, ready and willing to defend the things worth fighting for. But then they fucked it all up, and he's going to be reset to roughly the position he was at the midway point of Season 1, meaning this entire arc is a waste of time. Still, I guess it saves us the trouble of painstakingly breaking it down in this video, right? Mighty Morphin Power Elf rather undoes whatever reputational gain she makes in this scene, because she seems to think that being nice to one weird-looking angry floor boy is her one good deed for the day. So rather than making sure he's safe and then going off to help other survivors, like this guy who she just lets burn to death, she grabs angry floor boy and strolls off. Job done. Everyone else can take care of themselves. Once again, this is because the show has marked these two as its main characters, but it's imbued them with its own myopia. You might only be interested in your protagonist's immediate goal and purpose, but if your protagonist is only interested in that meta goal and purpose, to the exclusion of all other concerns, then you make them look unpardonably selfish. How many lives might she have saved had she not been so? Sailor Twink, meanwhile, is trying to help people. He's only a few feet away from where Mighty Morphin Power Elf encountered Angry Floor Boy, and he's struggling to lift a fallen roof off of Lieutenant Twunk. Mighty Morphin Power Elf might have helped him with that, but she can't be fucked. And yes, lest you were worried, Lieutenant Twunk is still Lieutenant Twunk. He's not had his name spoiled by any unappetizing scars or burns. None of the main cast suffers any physical comeuppance from being hit full blast by a volcano. Queenie gains what I think we are now obliged to call a situational disability. She goes blind after stupidly walking into a fiery pole, but this does not permanently mark her skin in any way. Every single named character emerges from hell ready for the next cringy photo shoot the Rings of Power marketing team keeps coming out with for some reason. Yes, this is a massive missed opportunity, since characters ideally suffer for their trials. It's one very simple way of showing the audience the toll great adventures take, and it aids the impression that they are mortal beings who are in danger, rather than untouchable paragons of whatever silly fad the writers wish to convey this week. Queenie seems to have done the best job of being a decent person. She's marshaled a whole band of ragged survivors already. This is what leadership is. Isn't it great how Mighty Morphin Power Elf suffers by every single comparison you care to make, and the show doesn't even realize it? With the aid of Queenie's awesome womanly strength, in case Hello Future Me is watching at this point, this is a joke, not misogyny. The debris is lifted from Lieutenant Twonk's body. But oh no, it's Soyathor, and he's dead. Sad Gollum face, I guess. Alas, Soyathor, we barely knew thee. But it's fine, because the show itself is over it inside of 10 seconds. This is almost more frustrating than not bothering at all. It's a perfectly serviceable trope. It is, as mentioned, one of the most harrowing things about, especially, older wars and conflicts, back when it was genuinely possible to be naive about the world. Read any account of the bands of young friends signing up en masse from English villages to fight in World War I, believing it to be something of a romp, an adventure, only to discover, as indeed the whole world swiftly did, that war does indeed change. It's this kind of trope that, if deployed, demands care and attention in its deployment. It's not a throwaway thing you can include at the last minute because it's in your plot by numbers book. After all, this is supposed to be an adaptation of Tolkien, and Tolkien not only served in the Great War, but served at the Somme, one of its most grubby and brutal episodes. His experiences informed his writing, as how could they not, though he apportioned to them no impact on the nature of his plot. Rather, they impacted his descriptions and his choice of imagery. Think Frodo describing the Dead Marshes, which we know definitively was inspired by the Somme, thanks to letter 226. The description in question: they lie in all the pools, pale faces deep, deep under the dark water. I saw them, grim faces and evil, and noble faces and sad. Many faces, proud and fair, and weeds in their silver hair, but all foul, all rotting, all dead. There is, moreover, an exact match of the trope in question in Tolkien's own experience, or an almost exact match. Tolkien was not naive about the war and did not sign up in a spirit of adventure, but rather in response to the very real opprobrium visited upon disinterested and reluctant young men by all of society. He had some sense what he was letting himself in for, but he did it anyway. Early in his life, Tolkien founded the Tea Club and Barovian Society with a group of 3 school friends: Rob Gilson, Jeffrey Smith, and Christopher Wiseman. Wiseman. It would almost certainly be too strong a claim to say that this was an early prototype of the Inklings, but it did serve a similar function, very close friends bonding over shared loves of literature and of tea. And it is to the TCBS that Tolkien attributes his first great inspiration to devote much time to poetry, without which The Lord of the Rings itself is all but unimaginable. All four of these principal members, and a number of others who were also friends, served in the First World War. Gilson and Smith arriving at the Somme shortly before Tolkien himself. Rob Gilson died on the first day of the Allied assault, the 1st of July 1916. Geoffrey Smith wrote to inform Tolkien of the fact, and I'll take just an excerpt from Tolkien's response to bolster the point that I'm making here about the importance of doing this trope justice. And I quote, "I cannot get away from the conclusion that it is wrong to confound the greatness which Rob has won with the greatness which he himself doubted. He himself will know that I am only being perfectly sincere, and I am in no way unfaithful to my love for him, which I only realize now more and more daily that he has gone from the fore. When I say that I now believe that if the greatness which we three certainly meant, and meant as more than holiness or nobility alone, is really the lot of the TCBS, then the death of any of its members is but a bitter winnowing of those who were not meant to be great, at least directly. God grant that this does not sound arrogant. I feel humbler enough in truth and immeasurably weaker and poorer now. The greatness I meant was that of a great instrument in God's hands, a mover, a doer, even an achiever of great things, a beginner at the very least of large things. The greatness which Rob has found is in no way smaller, for the greatness I meant and tremblingly hoped for as ours is valueless unless steeped with the same holiness of courage and suffering and sacrifice, but it is of a different kind. His greatness is, in other words, now a personal matter with us, of a kind to make us keep July 1st as a special day for all the years God may grant to any of us, but only touches the TCBS on that precise side which perhaps, it is possible, was the only one that Rob really felt. Friendship to the nth power. What I meant, and thought Chris meant, and I'm almost sure you meant, was that the TCBS has been granted some spark of fire, certainly as a body, if not singly, that was destined to kindle a new light, or, what is the same thing, rekindle an old light in the world. That the TCBS was destined to testify for God and truth in a more direct way, even than by laying down its several lives in this war, which is, for all the evil of our own side, with large view, good against evil. So far, my chief impression is that something has gone crack. I feel just the same to both of you, nearer if anything and very much in need of you. I am hungry and lonely, of course, but I don't feel a member of a little complete body now. I honestly feel that the TCBS has ended. But I am not at all sure that it is not an unreliable feeling that will vanish, like magic perhaps, when we come together again. Still, I feel a mere individual at present, with intense feelings more than ideas, but very powerless. Of course the TCBS may have been all we dreamt, and its work in the end be done by 3 or 2 or 1 survivor, and the part of the others be trusted by God to that of the inspiration which we do know we all got and get from one another. To this I now pin my hopes, and pray God that the people chosen to carry on the TCBS may be no fewer than we three." End quote. That letter was sent in August of 1916. In November, its recipient, Geoffrey Smith, himself died. He was hit by shrapnel. So of the original 4 members of the club, only 2 remained at the close, to say nothing of the other friends and members lost. I include all this here because, as I say, it is a serious trope, and it deserves to be treated seriously. The tragedy of it is so obviously profound. Imagine your group of best friends through childhood, and all the things you did and dreamed you might do together. Now imagine that all but 1 or 2 of them were dead, and how does that make you feel? And the similarities between what Rings of Power is aiming at and what Tolkien lived are so obviously there that it must be done well, or it should not be done at all. Sailor Twink, Lieutenant Twunk, and Sawyer Thor were intended to be that young club of wistful dreamers, and now the most innocent amongst them is dead. It takes some considerable lack of imagination, and no small distance from personal tragedy for a writer to make something like that seem mundane, but Rings of Power has achieved it. It got all of 10 seconds. It's never going to be mentioned again. No one will ever reflect on it. Sawyer Thor's name will never again be mentioned. It isn't used to bolster the characters of the 2 survivors. They learn nothing from it. They never think of it again. A blink and you miss it tragedy is not, ultimately, all that tragic. It's just there because the writers wanted to hit that number, but given how careless they've been with it, I think we'd all have preferred that they'd not bothered. Anyway, back to more frivolous matters. Queenie, continuing to bolster herself in our esteem, commands Sailor Twink and Lieutenant Hunk help break open a shack in which people are trapped under a roof that is soon to come down. This is all good stuff from Queenie, but it doesn't quite undo the fact that she embarked on this crazy venture to begin with, to install a king she doesn't know is a king on the word of an elf she believes could end her whole kingdom, who found a random symbol that could denote pretty much anything because a tree shed some petals. In other words, Queenie has rather a lot of making up to do. She's been a bit of a fool. At this point, her best hope is that she shares plenty more scenes with Mighty Morphin Power Elf, since she cannot fail to look noble and wise by that comparison. Together, they succeed in rescuing some trapped village children, but then a beam falls, and I realize I was premature earlier. Doesn't happen often, trust me, but I was premature in saying that she stupidly walked into it. No, she just gets sprayed in the face by some sparks coming off of it, and this is what causes her blindness. If this seems implausible, and believe me, I lived on a boat, my heating was a wood burner, I have had plenty of experience with fire in the face, it's because it is implausible. Walking into a burning beam would be a much more sensible explanation for her blindness, but since the show wants her to hide the fact that she's blind, for no reason that's apparent even 3 episodes into season 2, the show could not have her encounter anything that would leave a scar. I'll probably cover the question of her blindness in more detail when we come on to season 2. Don't worry, that's going to be another video, this one's quite long enough already. Suffice it for now to say that her hiding her blindness, so far at least, works against the show. After all, when she returns to Numenor, her fitness to rule is supposed to be in question. At the time I'm making this part of the video, after season 2 episode 3, the blindness doesn't factor much at all. There is, I think, one scene where the show attempts to leverage it for tension, but since it's not the reason for her eventual usurpation, it leads nowhere. Assuming it continues to lead nowhere, I think Rings of Power would have been much better served by taking pretty much the opposite approach. Have her struggle to retain the faith and confidence of her men in season 1 because they all know about her blindness. Have Pharazôn manipulating the political scene in Numenor in season 2 by using her known blindness to undermine her. See her struggle to retain power and the people's faith in same, and portray her as straining to keep everything together. The audience should be sympathetic, seeing that, though blind, she remains in some sense farsighted and wise. The audience could recognize the games played against her for the injustice they really are. The audience should register the tragedy as a good woman unfairly brought down, not because of the scars of war which she bears, but because crowds are fickle and politicians are dishonest. They exploit even the visage of weakness. That then would be a story of treason much more compelling than the one we're going to get, which really is just suddenly fucking eagle. But as I say, we'll deal with that more fully in the season 2 videos. Back to the present, the building does indeed collapse with Sailor Twink trapped inside. Oh dear, I wonder if they're going to try and dig him out, or whether they'll just assume he's dead and leave him behind. Actually, no, I don't wonder, because I've seen it already. That is exactly what they're going to do. All of a sudden, we find ourselves back with the not hobbits, which feels like a massive shift in just about every area that matters. Tone, severity, pace, significance, meaning, point, value, sanity, and so on.
One autumn day so fine, he found 100 big ones. I wish that they were mine.
Greedy whore. The group of not hobbits we're supposed to care about, Brandy, Podge, Steve, and the fam, catch up with the rest of the caravan only to discover that some of their favorite trees have been taken out by some fiery boulders shot out from Mount Doom. The best guess of the person who made the interactive map, and really I do feel for them, this is Rings of Power. It doesn't know where the fuck it is most of the time, but the best guess places the grove they are in here. That is about 350 miles as the crow, or in this case the fiery rock flies. Volcanic bombs, to give them their untechnical sounding technical name, generally do not travel this far. In fact, I'm not sure any have ever traveled this far. You're generally looking more in the 5-mile range than the 350-mile range. And my goodness, how cosmically unlucky that one should just happen to have been flung 350 miles to hit the one specific patch of trees from which the not hobbits were planning on harvesting their apples. Now they can no longer harvest apples, they'll have to go back down the trail and harvest their dead.
My great-grand used to speak of mountains to the south that could spit fire rock. He said they go to sleep. only to wake again when a new evil is rising.
Oh, shut the fuck up, you hairy midget. No! Stop trying to link yourself to the grander theme. You're irrelevant, that's your whole thing. At this point, there is precisely one volcano in all of Middle-earth. That is Orodruin, the Fire Mountain, Mount Doom. There used to be a series of volcanic peaks at Thrangorodrim in the First Age. They were created by Morgoth as well, and were the highest peaks in all the world at that time. That was until Erendil slayed the dragon and Salagon the Black. And Salagon the Black was so large that in his death he crushed the mountains, and there you thought Vagar was big. This was, as mentioned, way back in the First Age. There were no hobbits or Harfoots in the First Age, so Lenny Henry's gran cannot have known about them. And the Southlands must have been nice and green for 1,000 years, since the parchment Mighty Morphed Power Elf found in Numenor is about that old, and it spoke of a plan to activate Mount Doom. Meaning, of course, that Mount Doom cannot have been active in the last 1,000 years. So I really don't think Lenny Henry's gran could have heard about that either. The fact this plainly doesn't add up, but the line exists anyway, suggests the line really is there because the writers are concerned that these stories feel too discreet at the moment, too disconnected, too irrelevant to each other. So it's forced in a link that breaks its own law, and the actual law, and the laws of physics all in one go. Wonderful stuff, very efficient, well done. Anyway, the not hobbits are very upset that all their apples now look like somebody overcooked them in Breath of the Wild, so Lenny Henry and his old hag insist on asking Steve to fix it for them. This he does, but given he is still partially brain damaged, and he struggles to control his powers without the stick that serves as his McMuffin in Season 2, he slightly overdoes it. Only slightly, I stress. It does in fact work, but because some stupid child walks close to the tree he's trying to fix, he almost squashes it when a branch detaches from the trunk. The idiot child is saved by Brandy, and by saved I mean she dives on top of her and prevents her getting mildly bruised by a glorified twig. Naturally, this earns Steve reproachful looks from all the not hobbits, including Brandy herself. Even though they told him to do this, they've already seen him struggle to control his powers, and they let the stupid child run toward him while he was working, so I would have thought this is entirely on them. Leave Steve alone, you little bastards. That terrifically exciting scene dispensed with, and really, why the fuck does it exist? What does it achieve that hasn't already been achieved? We hop thousands of miles away to Moria, where young Ned presents King Charles with a rather attractive deal.
In exchange for access to your Mithril mines, the elves are prepared to furnish this city with game, grain, and timber from the elder forests of Eriador for the next 5 centuries.
This is going to be worth remembering when we come on to Season 2 and find that the dwarves are running out of food for stupid reasons. The elves at that time will still want Mithril, the dwarves at that point will very much need 500 years of supplies, but they completely forget that this scene right here exists, so they instead barter for some fucking magic rings that the dwarves neither want nor need, but both want and need now because shut up. I can't help but think Gil-galad should be here himself negotiating with King Charles, king to king, given the fate of his entire race and, so he says, all Middle-earth is in the balance, and his presence might persuade King Charles to take it seriously. But Gil-galad is a bit like an NPC in an old Bethesda RPG who's not allowed to move from his allotted location, so he's still standing by his moon pool back in Lindon, I bet. It is interesting from a world-building perspective to note how brand new this proposal seems to both parties. Rings of Power gives the impression that no trading relationship of any sort exists between the elves and the dwarves, despite both existing in close proximity for quite some time, and despite young Ned having struck up a relationship with Prince Harry in the past. I don't believe the show has any particular reason for either thing being the case. Elves and dwarves should by now have collaborated and fallen out over Doriath, but they haven't as far as we know, and in the particular case, young Ned and Prince Harry's friendship seems to have no definite origin, and no lore to draw on at all. It exists rather because the writers understood that Legolas and Gimli's relationship was popular in better works and they wanted a simulacrum. Given the show wants to give the impression of long history, it's unfortunate that so many of its scenes, like this one, suggest the precise opposite, that everything is happening here and now for the first time because the cameras started rolling. We're left to assume a latent and natural distrust between the two peoples with no specific cause of strife between them, because much like everybody liking Gimli and Legolas, everybody is just vaguely aware that this was remarkable for breaking the norm. Elves and dwarves are generally hostile, so the public imagination has it, and so the show trades on this meta rather than anything it has either built or referenced. Not only have young Ned and Prince Harry struck up a friendship in the past of two races who never interact besides that, but young Ned has gone so far as to learn Dwarven language we see here. In the lore, the Dwarven language is Khuzdul, modeled to a significant extent on Hebrew, and of an entirely different linguistic family to any language spoken by the elves. The dwarves keep this language a secret, private to themselves, and very little is known of it in wider Middle-earth, because the dwarves are very successful in their secrecy. It would be remarkably unusual, and potentially quite grave, were it to emerge that any dwarf had taught Khuzdul to some outsider. In Rings of Power, the language is called merely Stone Tongue, and nobody seems to much mind that an elf has learned it, even though we already know the king badly distrusts the elves.
I see you've learned a few words of Stone Tongue. Impressive.
This kind of implies the dwarves are at least somewhat precious about the privacy of their language, but evidently they don't mind much if other people learn to speak it. For if they did mind, then obviously this revelation would see Prince Harry reprimanded at the very least, and probably shunned, deemed untrustworthy, unreliable, a leaker of secrets, someone fonder of the elves than of his own people. Given the show wants later to establish conflict between Prince Harry and King Charles, this might have been a useful thing to bring up. King Charles throwing at Prince Harry that his softness for the elves is putting his own people at risk, that he is sharing the secrets of his own people with a race who might well transpire to be their enemies. But all of that requires a mind for the interplay between world building and character, and Rings of Power doesn't have that. A mind, that is, generally. King Charles asks why he should trust any elf, and young Ned replies,
You should not, but you can trust me, for I am no common elf, but Elrond half-elf, and I see in elf that which they cannot see in themselves. That is why I stand before you now alone, pleading for you to save my people.
This means nothing in the context of the show because we have no clue what being half-elven really amounts to. King Charles could just as easily throw back, "Oh, great, you're asking me to trust elves and men. And self-evidently you're here on behalf of the elves, you just called them your people, it's the elves as a group who want the Mithril. Why should it matter if I trust you?" But he doesn't, because the writers think this line is impressive for some reason, so all their characters do as well. King Charles doesn't assent, it must be added, but he asks to speak to his son in private. It's not immediately clear why he wishes for this to be a private conversation, and after the conversation is over, it is no clearer. King Charles draws on dwarvish teachings about their own nature and backstory, created by the Valar Aule of rock and of fire, the rock seeking immortality, the fire knowing that everything must eventually be consumed. He uses this to argue against helping the elves in their quest for immortality. We will not dig deeper than the darkness, we will not risk dwarven lives for the elves, etc. It's not bad, but nor need it be private. If anything, the king would want to lord this apparent wisdom over the elves, giving the speech to young Ned, not to his son alone. The show's intuition is sound. It wants this to be a personal rather than public strife, building up to the split between Prince Harry and his father, but its orchestration is contrived. There is no reason why he shouldn't reject young Ned in this moment, drawing upon this moral lesson, only to flesh out the moral lesson in private disagreement with Prince Harry after the fact. This would be very easy to accomplish given it's how the scene will otherwise play out. I also can't help but note that young Ned missed out a pivotal part of the stakes here. After all, it's not just the elves at risk, but all of Middle-earth, or so they believe. The show needs this not to have been brought up in order to support the personal conflict between father and son, and I've said previously how the strength of the young Ned Prince Harry storylines are that they localize and personalize their concerns, but this is an example in which too much is being made of that good thing. This is the time not to junk the personal for the grand scale, but to marry the two together. Moreover, proceeding solely from the character's inner thoughts and motives, it is what young Ned should have brought up. He has no reason not to mention that the fate of Middle-earth is at stake. He has everything to gain by bringing it up. This scene is otherwise strong. Prince Harry is incensed that his father would, and the show inevitably makes this a metaphor, swat away the hand of a drowning friend because he's afraid of a rock fall, which metaphor is at least a little bit mixed. It's not unheard of, but people seldom drown while mining rocks. But the show does understand that this is a conflict of visions. It understands the dramatic potential of the stubborn and aloof father rebuffing the emotional and feeling son, done. That is all good stuff. But in this case, it's been earned by stupidity, by young Ned not mentioning the most relevant information. The simple fix is an extension of the one I just laid out. Have King Charles reject young Ned in person, drawing on the conclusion of the lesson he has just laid out. Have Prince Harry come to him privately afterwards, outraged by his decision, wherein King Charles can backfill the reasoning behind it.
The fate of the elves was decided many ages ago by minds much wiser. Defy their will, and this entire kingdom might fall. Perhaps the entire Middle-earth.
Again, not without merit, but again, somewhat confused. The confusion here does hark back to one of the show's general problems with cause and effect. We don't actually know if the elves' fate was decided long ago by minds wiser than their own, because we don't really know the source of their decline. The elves don't seem to entertain the concept that their decline is the plan of the gods. They seem quite specifically to pin it on a rising evil. They pinned it on rising evil before evil in fact was known to be rising. After all, at the time Gil-galad was drawing his conclusion, Sauron was a non-player. He was drifting aimlessly in the sea, or, to borrow from Season 2, he was flopping his way across Middle-earth in his powerless Gollum form. Season 1 wants to give the impression that Mighty Morphed Power Elf reawakened that evil, but since she hasn't done so yet, from whence is the elves' decline actually stemming? And from the elves' perspective, of course, they believe, they are quite sure of the fact, that their decline is caused by rising evil, which does put all Middle-earth in danger, but by not mentioning this to the dwarves, they allow King Charles to come away with the impression that this might be nothing abnormal at work, just the way of the world. Elves and dwarves are both voicing the same concern. The elves think doing nothing risks Middle-earth. King Charles has just told us he thinks doing something risks Middle-earth, but no one has attempted to link the two together for him. We can't expect King Charles to know better, because nobody ever tried to educate him, and I get the strong impression nobody ever tried to educate him because the elves themselves don't have a defined theory of their coming fall, and that in turn is because the writers don't have it clear in their own minds. At the moment, the effects of rising evil predate the actual rise of evil, and that is a problem, to put it lightly. Because the show is massively inefficient, we cut away from this scene with King Charles saying, "I'm sorry, my son, but their time has come," which apparently prompted no response from Prince Harry in the moment. I have no idea how that scene actually ended, because the show thinks cutting away is the same as a conclusion. Prince Harry is shortly to go off mining Mithril despite his father's orders, and this is the act that leads to their second argument, and it's the second argument that will see him stripped of his titles. But I really see no reason why that shouldn't have been the conclusion to the previous scene, since the argument had already begun. I get what Rings of Power is going for. It wants to show Prince Harry demonstrating his loyalty to his friend over his loyalty to his father, and this rash action leading to his fall. But those beats have already been hit, and you could stress them in the preceding scene, rather than taking up yet more time, in effect, repeating them for emphasis. This would allow more time and resources to develop characters and storylines. Even with $1 billion budget, you're still beholden to trade-offs. Money might be unlimited, but screen time is still limited. You should still be thinking all the time of efficiency. Time spent repeating a beat is time that cannot be spent developing one. If you ask me, the inefficiency of so many modern films and TV shows is directly correlated with the money being spent on them. When you're penny pinching, you are always aware that everything you spend should bring the maximum returns, the biggest bang for the buck. When you're given vast sums, you seem to lose that focus. Rings of Power can waste a huge amount of time on long pauses, tortured metaphors, and expensively repeated beats because they tacitly assume they can afford to. Consequently, they waste their own time and hours, as they are doing here. In this unnecessary interregnum, Prince Harry explains the aborted exchange with his father to Meghan Markle, and she reacts with anger, accusing the old king of being stubborn to the point of blind cruelty. And this is something else worth keeping in mind when we come to Season 2, where these roles are basically reversed. From the one prone to anger and lashing out at the king, Meghan Markle will morph into the pragmatic and fair-minded one at some point in the off-season, the one who chides Prince Harry for exactly the behavior she is demonstrating here and will demonstrate again later in this episode. It's far from the most egregious example of characters' motives and personalities being reset, but it is worth noting because it keeps fucking happening. Here, Meghan Markle is the one who suggests going rogue and reopening the Mithril mines in a bid to force the king to realize his mistake.
What kind of father would I be if I teach our children the will of a king should be counted as dross to be cast to the wind?
Oh god, though, I do want to stress that even admitting all of the problems I've just been laying out, this is all so much stronger than almost any other subplot in Rings of Power, and for precisely this reason: personal stakes, relationships disconnected from the A-plot that, by influencing characters involved in the A-plot, impact the A-plot. A character who's concerned about the lessons he'll teach his children, who are barely even on screen at any point across the entire season. It's honestly like these sequences have been written by an entirely different set of people. Look at them go, creating characters here. Isn't it nice to see? Despite the answer being no, young Ned is for some reason still permitted to wander around freely. This so Prince Harry can deliver the bad news himself. Whereas, given the supreme secrecy of the dwarves, the value of the Mithril, and their distrust of the elves, you might have thought they'd have escorted him out already by now, but no. Again, it is otherwise a strong scene. Both of them know what rejection means. These two friends know they are about to be parted, and quite probably forever. This scene has been earned by the fact that Rings of Power felt their friendship was worthy of a plotline to begin with.
We do not say goodbye. We say no.
M&iacute.
Means more than simply farewell. It means go towards goodness.
Hell, there's even a lot of unspoken drama here. Young Ned can appear stoical, even slightly optimistic, because he is an elf, and for him this is not truly an end. He will live on in Valinor, hardly an unpleasant fate. He may meet new people and make new friends, and being an elf and so older, he's more familiar with the transient nature of the world. The elves learn to bear their sadness at the passing of things around them. Dwarves, by contrast, do not. For Prince Harry, who was angered by the mere years they spent apart before this show started, this is the end. It's as good as the death of a friend, and that comes out in their distinct performances. The hardy dwarf reduced to tears, the effeminate elf able to look past it. And this is all the show's invention. These two have no relationship in lore to draw from, which makes it all the more frustrating that the talent behind scenes like this, which is so evidently present, is completely missing for 95% of the show. Unfortunately, things then go very significantly wrong, which I guess we can call a reversion to the mean. Young Ned gives back the Mithril shard Prince Harry gave him and he leaves. Prince Harry, upset, swipes the shard across the table, where it comes to rest by the diseased leaf that young Ned brought with him. It heals the leaf, thereby proving the elf's theory correct. And nobody thought to test this before? Nobody thought, hey, maybe we should take proof of concept to King Charles. He might still refuse, and it would then be clearly motivated by something deeper and perhaps darker than his distrust of the theory. But if it's so easy to show that it works, someone really should have, I don't know, shown that it works. Why didn't they do this back in Lindon? Going back to the efficiency point, you could accomplish this in 2 scenes. Ditch the stupid table thing, instead perform the trick with the leaf at the council meeting there. Have young Ned then present the same thing to King Charles. Have King Charles refuse to help anyway, and let that scene play out to the conclusion of his argument with Prince Harry. Everything and more that the show has tried to convey would be included in those 2 moments. Fuck it. No, writing isn't that hard. This is obvious stuff. It is second draft stuff, goddammit. Shocking and horrifically belated revelation over with. We're off back to the... is it still called the Southlands? Well, they haven't told us otherwise yet, so I guess we're still calling it the Southlands. Looks a lot like some other place to me, but, you know, I just can't think of its name, and without a title card or anything like that, I guess we've just got nothing to go on. No idea what this place is called, so we're just gonna stick with the Southlands for now. Angry Floorboy asks why the orcs would do something like this, turning on a volcano, burning everything before them. Because they're orcs, I hear you cry. But this is Rings of Power, and good is a point of view, Anakin. So no, it's not because they are evil, it's to create themselves the home they both long for and deserve, so their cutesy little orc families can live in peace. Angry Floorboy boldly suggests that he and Mighty Morphed Power Elf go take the land back and drive the orcs away. He and his army of 1, but then again, given that 1 is Mighty Morphed Power Elf, she could probably do it single-handedly, but she wouldn't because that would, you know, entail helping people. There is supposed to be something like a character beat present in this scene.
It's over.
Not for me. I won't allow it.
They must.
But lest the show's target audience of slow children not quite see what's happening here, and I'd completely forgive them were that the case, the show makes doubly sure we understand that, like everything else in which she's involved, this exchange is really all about Mighty Morphed Power Elf.
What are you so bothered about? It isn't your fault.
Yes, it is.
I think this counts as news, since while we know that Mighty Morphed Power Elf bears ultimate responsibility for how things end up, this precise occurrence is not actually her fault. She said Sauron was back. Gil-galad did his best impression of Harry Potter's Minister for Magic Fudge in saying Sauron is absolutely not back. Gil-galad sent her away. She stayed on mission. She found the clue in the Númenórean library. She somehow managed to get Queenie to give her an army and sent that all the way across the world to prevent this from happening. Nobody told her about the evil hilt of McMuffin, and she isn't the one who lost it, so she can't be blamed for Waldrick switching on the volcano. If anything, it's Gil-galad's fault for doubting her, and it's Queenie's fault for dithering over her decision, and it's Don Lemon's fault for losing the hilt and not telling her about it beforehand. If everybody had listened immediately to Mighty Morphed Power Elf, all of this probably would have been averted. And while, yes, she is responsible for reawakening Sauron, and she's responsible for bringing him back here, and she'll be responsible for the entire arc of Season 2 for horrific reasons we shall come on to, none of this has yet come to pass. None of it is yet at the fore in the show, i.e. nobody yet knows that is what is going to happen, including Mighty Morphed Power Elf. So, no one, including her, can reasonably blame her for things that have not yet happened. Is this yet another instance of the show just anticipating itself, or will we perhaps get some explanation from her in this scene? Some heart-to-heart moment between her and Angry Floorboy? Any explanation at all as to why she... So anyway, we cut away to the bedraggled Númenóreans leading the bedraggled villagers through hell. Everybody looks tired and upset, especially Elendil, who of course does not know yet if his son is alive or dead. He sees Sailor Twink's horse, but the man leading it is not Sailor Twink, so that's a bummer. But then Queenie and Lieutenant Hunk turn up and confirm wordlessly that Sailor Twink is dead, which they don't actually know, but we're all running with that assumption and no one's going to question it. We know, of course, that he isn't dead. They didn't stick around long enough to find out whether he was dead, and if Elendil wanted to make sure, he already has a perfectly simple means of doing so. It's the horse, stupid. Remember how Elendil told us quite plainly that the horse has pair bonded with Sailor Twink, that it knows his every thought, that their minds are one? Now, fair enough, for the moment the horse is not acting up, but it is shortly to start misbehaving, champing at the bit to use an oddly appropriate cliche, trying very hard to run away, trying so hard they eventually relent and let it go. To where might the horse be going, Elendil? What could possibly be drawing the horse away, Elendil? Might the horse, perchance, be trying to return to its master? Because that happened in the Two Towers and this is Rings of Power and these writers are dirty little fucking thieves? Yeah, I think that might be it, Elendil, and I think you should know very well that that might be it, Elendil, given you're the one who set it up for us in that earlier scene, Elendil. It is quite remarkable, really, that the one character who we know knows how this works, who is also the one character who should be keenest to believe that this is how it works, should never once consider that this might, in fact, be how this fucking works. Elendil watches the horse strain to escape later, he lets it go, he watches it run off, and he just goes back to moping about a son he didn't even bother to check is dead. Oh, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Speaking of moping and sons, we rejoin Angry Floorboy and Mighty Morphed Power Elf. Angry Floorboy is moping that everybody he knows is dead. Don Lemon, his mother, all the friends that we've neither seen nor bothered naming, and I, to be honest, don't really believe at all that he has them. This belief persists because Mighty Morphed Power Elf grabbed him and she took him out of the village, completely ignoring all of the very much not dead people around them, including Queenie, who was busy rescuing all the very much not dead people who were mere feet away from them as they left. As with Elendil, his son, and the horse, the writers are here contriving particular scenes to suit their meta-narrative needs, and contorting characters' thoughts and actions to achieve it. It wants father and son to be parted, presumably so Sailor Twink can go on a personal fulfillment quest in Season 2 that leads to an emotional reunion. And it wants Angry Floorboy and Mighty Morphed Power Elf separated from the rest of the group here, who they could quite easily track because they'd be leaving footprints in the ash, but never mind. It wants this for two purposes, one of which is quite similar to that I'm sure it's planning on for Sailor Twink. It wants Angry Floorboy to believe his mother is dead so they can have a heartwarming reunion scene later, and it wants Mighty Morphed Power Elf away from the main plot so she can seem somewhat relatable in encouraging a small child.
When I was your age, there was no such thing as orcs.
And now? How many have you killed?
Many.
Good.
I would not use such words.
Why not?
It darkens the heart.
Yes, this is coming from the woman who recently threatened to torture a guy's children and make him watch. And no, that's not really a redeemable statement. But the point of these scenes is to show Mighty Morphed Power Elf softening, balancing her personal scales a little bit more toward wisdom and away from anger, being responsible for someone younger and less experienced, and so acting more responsibly. It's supposed to be an arc of sorts. Yes, apparently this is time for arcs.
Every war is fought both without and within. Of that every soldier must be mindful.
Why, yes, it is kind of wild that someone who has held the title Commander of the Northern Armies since well before episode 1 should have waited until the penultimate episode of the entire season to even begin acting in a matter befitting her station. Why, yes, this arc is going to be made redundant when she relapses later and proves that she has learned nothing. Temporary praise for the show understanding that protagonists should have arcs and demonstrate growth, but lasting condemnation for the way it relegates this to a single short scene, having first made her implausibly rash for an elf of her age and station, and even more lasting condemnation for the fact that season 1 will end by undoing almost everything this scene is supposed to accomplish, making it not so much an arc as a straight line with a small bump in it.
Why soldier then?
Perhaps we can make one of you yet.
What are you doing? What are you doing? You just got done telling us there are orcs all over the place and you're in tremendous danger. What are you gonna do if you get ambushed? Fight them with the sheer force of your personality? Oh, we get it, Cho, we get it. She's playing mentor to demonstrate her temporary wisdom buff. Great, well done. But you shouldn't be taking point out of intelligence for her to do this. Just give him a fucking dagger if you've got one. Give him a sharp stick. Don't give him your primary weapon in the middle of hostile territory, you moron. You could have had this beat at the end of their journey, once they'd been through their trials and survived. Angry Floorboy proving himself to be a soldier, which she could reward in parting by giving him her sword. Now they are out of danger. This seems crazily premature by comparison. Over again with Queenie and the gang. Queenie is now hiding the fact that she is blind. Not sure how she got on the horse without anybody noticing that she can't see her own hands, but you know, the manner of the reveal isn't terrible.
How much further until we reach the encampment?
It's just beyond this rise.
How much further until we're clear of this smoke? How long have we been clear of it?
Nearly a mile.
The intent, too, is laudable. Here she is, trying to hold it together for her beleaguered followers in order that they not lose all hope. The problem, as I've mentioned earlier, is that besides this specific scene, the show really doesn't have many ideas for this potential arc, and as of Season 2, Episode 3, it is pretty redundant. Later in Season 1, we see her with a bandage around her eyes in public, which you'd think some of her followers might notice and mention on their return to Numenor. It is a potentially powerful thing, but the writers ran out of ideas, and so it remains in stasis rather than developing as a plot point. If, by contrast, it were generally acknowledged that she'd gone blind, later in this episode, when they reach the camp and are out of danger, we'd retain all the good stuff from this scene, the effort she went to keep spirits up and guide her people from their lowest point, while also setting up a useful beat for Season 2, as her blindness, by then widely known, could be used by her political opponents to undermine her. As it is, though, she lies about it here, nobody notices later despite her wearing a blindfold, and nobody seems to know about it in the first half of Season 2, and yet it doesn't factor into any of the political maneuvers made against her in Season 2, and the political maneuvers themselves don't factor into her eventual usurpation, because all that took was for an eagle to turn up and squawk at Pharazôn. Blindness then should have been a situational disability, a promising idea even, but it was neglected and it was exhausted. Many such cases. Queenie pleads with Elendil to help her carry off the lie, and he duly leads her horse back to the Númenórean camp that they absolutely did not have time to set up because they were all riding full pelt toward the village in the last episode, but I guess never mind. Then we meanwhile thousands of miles away to the Not Hobbits, where Lenny Henry is seemingly banishing Steve for the heinous crime of doing exactly what they asked him to. It's not an acrimonious exile. Lenny Henry just points him toward, and I quote, big folk settlements, where he presumes Steve will probably more at home. What these big folk settlements are and where they are and who they are, we have no idea. You'd have thought large settlements of men might have factored into the Númenórean invasion plan, but they didn't get a mention. Whatever, we know we're not actually going to go there, so we'll just let it slide. Lenny Henry suggests the big folk might be able to help him find the stars he's looking for, and gives him the star map.
Harfoot folk haven't seen him since the days our ancestors lived in parts unknown over 1,000 years ago.
The only way this can make even a shred of sense is if it means the stars are pretty much half the world away, and the not hobbits haven't migrated that far in thousands of years. Except of course that they are not half the world away, because we already know they are heading toward Rhûn, and they are already north of Mordor. Those stars should be present in the night sky already from where they currently sit. Not to mention that there probably weren't any not hobbits around over 1,000 years ago, and their little star maps wouldn't have survived intact and legible, stored for that long in the back of a rickety old caravan. Steve wanders off, attracting absurdly nasty looks from the people who asked him to help them, but oh look, there's a little flower growing on the tree. Brandy gives him an apple for his troubles, and I think I complained back in the before times section of this video about her every scene across the first 3 episodes featuring lines to the effect of, "Oh, why must you be so adventurous? The world's too big for us Harfoots," even though wandering is literally our whole thing. Don't you know, Brandy, that the tallest milkweed always gets snipped like a baby's foreskin at a bris? Well, we've not had too much of that across the last 2 or 3 episodes, but it has been replaced by an equally tiresome repetition. How long now have we been doing the Steve isn't one of us beat? Because that seems like every one of his scenes we've covered in the last few hours. He kind of helps, but oh no, he can't control his magic, so now they fear him. Then he kind of helps again, but oh no, he still can't control his magic, so they fear him again. And so on, and so on, and so on. We get it, show. And whenever this is the sole point conveyed in a scene, which it pretty much is here, and as it was with the ice healing earlier, and as it was with the wolf attack even before that, it is a complete waste of our time. It's done. It's established. We know this is their relationship. It feels like it keeps recurring in scenes solely because the writers want to remind us that this plotline exists, but they have nothing else to convey about it or in it. This is a problem with comparative pacing. Rings of Power generally is slower than a Paralympian with a puncture, but by every measure, its other plotlines have much more going on than the Harfoots and Steve. Hell, one of them just went from discount Helm's Deep battle to a volcano going off to a blinded queen and a dead son, whereas the entire subplot with the Not Hobbits can be summed up as, they walk to a place, but it's not the place that Steve needs to be, so he leaves. That is basically it. And it's going to continue into season 2 as well, where we will frequently cut away from the fate of the world to Steve dreaming about a stick that he really wants to find. I think the goal here is to establish a contrast, and the writers have certainly established a contrast, but it is not a contrast you should desire. They want an ostensibly smaller scale, more quaint and personal story to break up the monotonous severity of everything else. But beyond that premise, they have failed to deliver, because they just don't have much of a story to tell here or any characters to tell it. Compare it with the Dwarven subplot, with the amount of character work being done, and which is obviously connected to events of larger significance, and you instantly spot the flaw with the Not Hobbits. They are badly underserved when it comes to consequential storylines and characters. They have to exist for some later thing, but until we get there, they're just an afterthought. It's just, oh, fuck yeah, we forgot about them. We need to remind the audience that this is happening. Back we go. Brandy giving Steve an apple shows us what we already know as well. She's the only one brave enough to call him friend, but we already knew that.
Should have just stayed on trail. I saw that star falling. Should have just let it alone. But now I understand. I'm just a Harfoot. That's all I'll ever be.
Oh joy, we're doing this again. Hooray! I'd completely forgotten what her one defining attribute is. Later that same night, I assume, we join Mighty Morphed Power Elf and Angry Floor Boy, who asks whether Mighty Morphed Power Elf has ever lost any family members to the orcs, like he assumes that he has. And here, Rings of Power does what Rings of Power does best.
My brother and my husband.
Husband?
Celeborn.
Well, geez, someone should really tell actual Galadriel that this chap standing beside her here is an imposter. Identity theft has taken place. She's been boning someone else. This isn't her husband. I can only assume that this will transpire in later seasons to have been either a mistake on Mighty Morphed Power Elf's part, i.e. she thinks he's dead but he's really, held captive somewhere, or else it's temporarily true and he will come back re-embodied from Valinor. This is so obvious and so pointless and so obstructive a law break, there's just no way, I think, perhaps naively, that they'll let it stand? They can't, surely. By far the easiest solution from the show's perspective would be the latter one. Canonically, elf spirits return to the halls of Mandos in Valinor after death, and there they can take on new bodies. There is even precedent for a dead elf being re-embodied and returned to Middle-earth. Glorfindel, whose story essentially preempts Gandalf's. Glorfindel leads survivors out of Gondolin after Morgoth's forces sack it. To protect them, he fights a Balrog alone atop a mountain, and he dies in the attempt. He returns to Valinor, but owing to his great power and his moral stature, he is reincarnated and sent back to Middle-earth in the Second Age to help in the fight against Sauron. Taking this approach would avoid a number of fairly chunky problems with the other approach, that being that Celeborn is in fact still alive but captured or in hiding or else simply, not around? He'd have to be restrained somewhere, for otherwise there would be nothing to stop him returning to Lindon. And so Mighty Morphed Power Elf becoming aware he's still alive. Granted, were I him, and if I were shackled to her, I would want to remain in hiding forever, but I don't think the show realizes that's what it's done with her character. She spent about 1,000 years hunting for Sauron, though the show made the death of her brother its instigating motive as opposed to the death of the husband. This is the first time Celeborn is even mentioned, which does seem a little bit odd. If he was still alive somewhere, she'd have had 1,000 years to become aware of it. And after all, where and by whom would he be being held captive? Sauron isn't in power, Adar knows nothing about him, he's evidently not in the Southlands, so yeah, my assumption would be that he gets introduced in a later season, with the writers cribbing from Glorfindel. Hell, maybe they'll even do a direct play on Sauron's appearance as Anatar in Season 2, in order to show the difference between the arrival of a false and a true messenger of the Valar. Or maybe I'm just writing a better show and they really do think he's dead, and that his death is worthy of just this one mention, all other considerations be damned. That would be a very Rings of Power thing to do, and I am acutely aware that many of my predictions for how the Acolyte would turn out were incorrect because they amounted to telling a better story than the writers could imagine. But surely Celeborn isn't perma-dead? He can't be. He literally can't be. Unless Rings of Power thinks Peter Jackson was doing some weird Invasion of the Body Snatchers type shit in Lothlorien.
What you said before, you're wrong. It isn't your fault. It's mine.
None of you are called Waldrick, goddammit, stop stealing his thunder! We've already gone over how it's not her fault, much as it pains me to say it. That pain is salved by the knowledge that far worse things are coming that will all be her fault. But is it even Angry Floorboy's fault? He stole the evil hilt of McMuffin, but he stole it from a guy who would always have used it himself, as evidenced by the fact that he used it himself. By stealing it, Angry Floorboy indirectly revealed to Adar that it had been found and where it was. But Adar must have known about the hilt already, and his plans were in motion long before he heard it had been discovered. Absent Angry Floorboy's intervention, events would likely have panned out much as they did, and Waldrick would have done exactly what he did. Don't get me wrong, I don't like Angry Floorboy, it gives me no pleasure exonerating him, but I have absolutely no idea what either of these Muppets is referring to in their blame game. It's not just why are they making it all about themselves? It's how are they making it all about themselves? What is going on in those vast abandoned aircraft hangars they call their brains? What are they referring to here?
I gave power to the enemy, so that makes me responsible.
Yeah, but a whole bunch of stuff happened after that. Adar didn't take the evil hilt of McMuffin from you and personally use it to activate Mount Doom. The Númenóreans attacked, he ran off with it, Mighty Morphed Power Elf got it back, Don Lemon forgot to tell her how important it is, then he mislaid it, then he didn't notice it had been stolen, then Waldrick grabbed it and wrote himself into the history books as the man who made Mordor. You were there for all of this, Angry Floorboy, I don't know I'm the one who remembers it. Mighty Morphed Power Elf tells him not to worry. He didn't intend for any of it to happen, and the gods will understand, and he shouldn't carry the burden because if he does, he may struggle to put it down again, which line reveals the actual point of this exchange, that being to tell us something about Mighty Morphed Power Elf's inner thoughts, which are pretty much what we've always assumed them to be, on the rare occasions when she's not dreaming about torturing children in front of their father like the hero that she is. You might think she's learning a lesson in all this, which is why we are having this conversation conversation. You might very well think that because it's usually the point of scenes like this, but she's not, because she's not really a character. We're just supposed to feel a little bit sorrier for her now we know that she used to be happy, but then her husband and her brother died. You know, much like we established in episode 1, right at the beginning in fact, which told us she was pretty happy until her brother died. Is this progress? Is this development? It feels like it's meant to be, but it also feels like it isn't. Mercifully, the conversation is interrupted by some patrolling orcs, who now pose a tremendous danger to them because Mighty Morphed Power Elf stupidly gave her sword away. Though this is still the person who took out an ice troll in about 30 seconds through the awesome power of her womanry, so it's kind of hard to drum up tension when her prospective opponents are just a small band of orcs. These orcs all have the Chinese flu, so they can't smell anything but ash, which allows our, heroes to go undetected. Then we hop away to Moria again, where we find Prince Harry and young Ned privately mining for Mithril. Quite how they hope to go undetected, I have no idea, because they are causing the whole mountain to shake. So it's to nobody's surprise but theirs that after another of the most character, if somewhat redundant scenes in the entire show, they discover a vast vein of Mithril, and are then discovered themselves.
Dwarf, son of Durin. Grandson.
Scoff, if you like. Mightiest thing a dwarf can do is to be worthy of the name of his father.
Notwithstanding the thoroughly stupid reason the dwarves are offered their rings in Season 2, Rings of Power is aiding any future transition in the character of the dwarves that the rings bring about. By having King Charles refuse to mine the Mithril out of caution, despite its vast potential, a clear and obvious contrast can be, and hopefully will be drawn, between the dwarves' pre- and post-rings. After all, canonically, Sauron's plan for the rings was to ensnare the will of all the free peoples of Middle-earth, but he only truly succeeds with the men. The elves are all but entirely immune to his influence, and the dwarves are mostly immune to it, immune enough to retain their individuality and avoid the fate of the Nine. What the dwarven rings do accomplish is heightening the dwarves' greedy productivity, which indirectly benefits Sauron, as wrathful, greedy dwarves do damage to themselves, as well as being easier to bribe with trinkets. So, if Rings of Power demonstrates this in the person of King Charles, going from the stodgy, conservative Mithril doomer we see him as here, to a greedy and careless Mithril miner in Season 2 or beyond, the influence of the rings will be clearer to see because the show has bothered to set it up in this way. This isn't definitive praise, it's more just prospective praise, because at the time I'm making this video, I have no idea if Season 2 will do any of this, but it has given itself a pretty strong start. So young Ned gets kicked out, and Prince Harry gets into a fight with King Charles that, art imitating life or vice versa, sees King Charles strip him of his titles and of his inheritance, in another pretty strong scene that understands character resonates more than mere events.
When your mother bore you, something inside you was ill-formed. Your breathing was ragged and dry. A tiny, pitiful sound like scraping chalkstones. Folks said you'd never see your first winter. But every night, after your mother's weeping eyes had found refuge in sleep, I held you to the firelight, kept your chin up all night long. Seemed to ease the burden a little. And one night, I gazed down on your tiny naked face, and I saw upon it the great grey beard of an old dwarven king, mighty and terrible as an army with banners. And when your mother woke, I told her she need cry no more. Her son would live, and he would move mountains!
Prince Harry responds that he cannot move mountains if his father gets frit every time he digs a hole. None of this is, or even has to be, groundbreaking stuff. Its strength is that it's not, and it doesn't try to be. It is rather a universal theme. The proud but overbearing father, the son who wants to be free to strive. The show wisely and deliberately plays on the father's stubborn hypocrisy, as when Prince Harry tells him that young Ned is as good a brother to him as one born of his own mother's womb, to which the king reacts in anger.
How dare you invoke your mother's memory to defend your decision to betray your own kind?
No, it's you that's betrayed our kind. Squandering our future so you can cling to the past.
You profane the crown you wear!
The hypocrisy there being, of course, that the king himself invoked his mother's memory mere seconds ago. Another universal trope: the parent holds the child to a standard they themselves repeatedly fail. But of course, the writers have sensibly not made this a purely one-sided affair morally. We sympathize with Prince Harry's frustration, but we've already seen that the king may be right to worry, and anyone who knows anything about the fate of Moria knows that he will be proven right in the end. This is closer to the purely tragic form, wherein we know the outcome and we witness the mistakes that ensure it happens. Neither father nor son is hero or villain. What matters is that this is how they see each other in this scene. Of course, it might have been avoidable, but neither character knows how to avoid it, hence the tragedy. Great events don't have to be triggered with magic keys and flooded volcano bullshit. They are on the whole more compelling when their causes are found in interactions like this. A clash of personalities and beliefs, rooted in the sort of grievances only family can produce. Unfortunately, we then leave the show at its height and roll some considerable way toward its depths, as we rejoin the now Steveless not hobbits. Steve did indeed fix the trees, so now there is apples for days, meaning Podge is in no danger of losing her name. She wanders off to fetch a pail of water, but comes across a mysterious booted footprint, and then she disappears? Fuck knows how, she's a pretty fat not hobbit. I'm pretty sure we'd have heard her splashing away, but fine. She leaves her pail behind her and it gets carried down the stream to where the real Slim Lady and her odd bunch of cutlery cultists are waiting. The show then does one of its weird time skips, so now it's in the middle of the night, and Podge, Brandy, and some of the other not hobbits are hiding in bushes, spying as the Slim Lady bunch hike up a hill toward their caravans. From the magically revived trees, they conclude that Steve was recently in the vicinity, and then Brandy does something quite astonishingly dumb.
Wait! You're going the wrong way! He went that way.
What the fuck are you doing? I don't even know how they knew which way Steve was going, but I extra special don't know why Brandy, who was with the rest of the not hobbits in exiling him, should now risk the discovery of her whole tribe by a bunch of oddly dressed ponslings in order to very obviously try and misdirect them. Oh no, they've disappeared. Oh, shock horror, they're right behind you. They teleport now? They teleport now. For some reason, a bunch of other not hobbits then arrive on the scene wielding torches, and they demand the Slim Lady bunch fuck off. I remind you, you Peter Dinklage motherfuckers, that you hide from strangers. This is your whole thing. This seems entirely out of character for your race, and your race really only has a couple of characteristics to its name, so it's a pretty significant leap and departure. Why are you risking the safety of your caravan for a person whose wheels you were about to cut off just a couple of episodes ago? And by wheels, we mean legs. The real Slim Lady uses magic to extinguish Father Not Hobbit's torch, then breathes fiery dust that ignites all the Not Hobbit's caravans. Oh boy, I sure do hope they were insured. Is this really such a terrible loss? I mean, they're just made of wood. You're surrounded by trees. You can just make more. And you are nomadic. You're not likely to have that many personal possessions to lose. My first boat caught fire, burned down, and sank. I'm pretty sure I lost more than all these little fuckers put together. But they all scream and wail and cry, and the music very much insists that this is a truly terrible development, so I guess these glorified wheelbarrows were very special indeed. Oh dear. Dick move by the Slim Lady bunch. But why did they even bother with this? We know they can teleport. We know they're not really interested in the not hobbits. They seemingly teleport out of scene immediately after setting the caravan on fire. Are they just doing this because they're evil? Yeah, I think they're just doing it because they're evil, and the show wasn't entirely sure how else to show that. They could have just teleported off, but they stuck around for a couple of seconds to bully some midgets. How very, very evil of them. Of course, with power like that, they could probably just kill all the midgets, but we have no idea yet whether they have a final solution to the midget problem because they don't follow up with anything. They're seemingly content to just let the not hobbits cry for a bit and disappear off to do their own thing. We jump straight off to the Númenórean camp, which they still didn't have time to make, and which seems surprisingly green and sunny given it's just a few miles from a newly erupted Mount Doom. This is the moment where Sailor Twink's horse starts misbehaving, and Elendil, failing to calm it, lets it go. He seems initially keen on bringing it back to Númenor, putting more effort into that than actually trying to find his own son.
I should never have pulled the elf on board.
Just follow the psychic horse, you catastrotard. Oh, this isn't going anywhere, by the way. Elendil is momentarily upset with Mighty Morphin Power Elf, but it doesn't really influence the course of events in any way. And as of Season 2, Episode 3, it hasn't come up again. He remains devoted to the Queen, whereas you might think that these events would at least give him cause to question his loyalties. If he truly believes this is all Mighty Morphin Power Elf's fault, and so the elf's fault, then he could have been portrayed as being torn between his duty to the Queen and his emotional connection to Pharazon's position. After all, his duty to the Queen entailed at least a little bit of trust in her wisdom, which to his mind is now fatally undermined. But none of that happens, so never mind. Speaking of Mighty Morphin Power Elf, she and Angry Floorboy also arrive back at camp, and he runs off to see whether his mother is still alive. Look at the show here, trying to drum up tension, trying to heighten the emotions. He finds a covered corpse. Oh no, surely it can't be her, can it? Oh boy, oh gee, oh golly, I sure do hope it's not her. That would be tragic. Oh, thank goodness she's alive. Looks in pretty rude health to me as well, but oh dear. What none of them know, and what the show itself doesn't know, is that the orcs had dipped their arrows in liquid orc AIDS or something, and it is currently seeping through her veins. You think she's alive? You think she's getting better? Everything about the show from this point till the end tells you this is the case, as she ascends in rank and importance, becoming the de facto leader of her people, negotiating with queens, leading her survivors over to Pelagia. Well, she's the queen who temporarily was, but then was not. She's very secretly dying this entire time. You didn't see that coming? Well, yeah, don't be too hard on yourselves. Neither did the writers. Oh, and Don Lemon's alive too, isn't that swell? Look at them hugging there. Truly, an arc has been followed. From emotionally hostile distance to adoptive father. I can't wait for Season 2 to completely undo all this hard work in a single scene. Mighty Morphin Power Elf enters the hospital tent. She asks no pertinent questions about how what just went down, which means Don Lemon will never have to account for not telling her about the evil hilt of McMuffin. Indeed, from Mighty Morphin Power Elf's perspective, that volcanic eruption was just monumental bad luck. She knows nothing about the hilt or the Orc's trench. She knows nothing at all about the mechanics of it. She turned up, she got into a fight, she was rewarded with what to her must seem like a sudden and random pyroclastic flow to the face. I think I'd be asking for a thorough debrief if I were her. But I'd never threaten to torture somebody's kids in front of them, so I'm not her, clearly. I'm not heroic enough. She does ask to see Queenie, who is now openly wearing her blindfold. Elendil informs Queenie that the ships are nearly ready to take them back to Numenor, though a garrison will remain behind to search for survivors. Quite why he wouldn't want to be part of this remaining garrison, I don't really know. I suppose it might be out of duty to the Queen, being one of only 2, now 3 people who know her secret, not counting anybody else who's believably seen her wearing her blindfold, or who will see it on the journey back.
No one kneels in Numenor. You are not in Numenor. Neither of you are. A fault that is mine alone.
I am very, very much unsure what change Mighty Morphin Power Elf is supposed to have undergone here. She believed evil was returning. She believed it so hard she was willing to put her own people in danger at the beginning of the show. She persuaded Queenie to bring an entire army to Middle-earth, only for evil to, in fact, return. Evil is, if anything, in a much stronger position now than it was when she was most set on finding it. Yes, people have died and she was responsible for bringing them here to begin with, but this isn't new to her. Her regret is new, but her regret comes after she was proven right. She hasn't changed her view about the dangers facing Middle-earth. If anything, she should be doubling down on that now that evil has its own realm, thus proving that it is very much a danger to Middle-earth. Why would her character, as written, relent now? She's never had less reason to feel remorse. And given this is how she's been drawn until this point, and given she continues to insist on fighting Sauron, why not have her double down? Why not have her insist that the Numenorians stay and fight, creating conflict with Queenie and driving home Elendil's own misgivings? You could end Season 1 in a state of heightened conflict simply by allowing your characters to follow their established motivations, or at the very least, use this to show Queenie in the impossible position of choosing between her faith, represented by Mighty Morphin Power Elf and the elves, and her people, as represented by Elendil. If Elendil blames Mighty Morphin Power Elf for the presumed death of his son, and Mighty Morphin Power Elf is stubbornly calling for more sacrifice because she cannot let go, and you have Queenie Queenie stuck in the middle of that, you have an immensely powerful scene that will reverberate through to your second season. This would be a far, far stronger through line than having Elendil vaguely resentful temporarily, and Mighty Morphed Power Elf vaguely regretful also temporarily, and Nameless Wench just standing there pointlessly because the show still thinks she's a main character temporarily, and Queenie blandly promising that Numenor will return. Hell, this even harms the future Numenor arc, since it eliminates the distance between Queenie and Pharazôn. If you have a villain who is intent on returning to Middle-earth to open up trade routes, and a hero intent on returning to accomplish something, then what's the difference between them? Where's their conflict? Oh, right, yeah, fuck it, no, the eagle will decide. I completely forgot. You don't need conflict when you have eagles. Back with the not hobbits, they're picking through the charred remains of their caravan.
We'll be all right. Pity's sake, Brandyfoot. Give us a moment to weep.
Give them a moment, for pity's sake.
You fucking stop that right now. Oh, and by the way, what happened to the Slim Lady bunch? Did they just burn your shit and disappear? Or are they still loitering around here somewhere, ready to attack you like they should have done last night? Father Not Hobbit gives a generically encouraging speech about sticking together and facing the challenges with their hearts that are bigger than their feet, which I'm pretty sure is very, very unhealthy, but who knows. In response to this testament to the collective good, Brandy, well, she just kind of fucks off.
Where are you going?
To help my friend.
I don't think that's quite what your dad meant by sticking together, lady. He's just told you that you'll pull through if you stick together, and your response is to ditch your family to go help a hobo? By warning him that the Slim Lady bunch are after him, even though they can teleport and for all you know they're well ahead of you by now?
She won't be alone. We've left enough folk behind. We're not leaving him.
You girls aren't going anywhere. Not without me.
Fucking brilliant. Now half the fam's abandoning the caravan.
Brandyfoot girl was right to help him. Was right all along. And if you think Malva Meadowgrass is too proud to admit it, well, what's the good of living, Sadok? If we aren't living good.
Just once. It would be grand if you weren't right all the time.
But she wasn't right all the time. She was the one who suggested you steal their wheels and leave them for dead. She was quite spectacularly wrong all the time. Old Crone is the evil one. And she's just told you she's changed her mind. You can't hear somebody say they've changed their mind and then say that they're right all the time. That is logically impossible, you illiterate fucking gypsy.
I'll fetch provisions and get me stick. I'm coming with you.
So your response to nobody goes off trail, nobody walks alone, we'll stick together and everything will be fine is, as their leader, to fuck off on a side quest and abandon your people. Rightio, good luck, I'm sure this will end well. Queenie and her Numenorians sail off. She is indeed wearing her blindfold in public. Somehow, nobody else notices, so her blindness is still a secret come season 2. Nameless Wench tells Mighty Morphed Power Elf that she'll lead her people to Pelagia for sanctuary. Her people, who are exhausted and many of whom are injured, are going to walk more than 450 miles. Know who else is swinging by Pelagia? The Numenorians, who have 3 whole ships and a lot of space on those ships, given they've lost a bunch of men and horses and left a whole garrison behind. Pelagia is on the mouth of the Anduin. They are sailing right past it on their way out. Why not take the wounded Southlanders on the ship? Drop them off on your way out. But no, I guess they've got more important places to be. Leave the fuckers to hobble their way out of the mountains. Some of them might survive the orc attacks. Mighty Morphed Power Elf meanwhile says she will go to report to Gil-galad.
What of our king? Your king? Has no one informed you? Informed me of what?
You didn't think to ask? You were literally in the hospital tent a couple of scenes back. You brought him here. He was your whole plan. You're basically in love with him. And instead you've been pissing about just assuming he's what? Busy? Dead? That's the kind of thing you might want to check, you ridiculous person. But oh no, it turns out that King Sauron, first of his name, has been mortally wounded. Unless he's treated with elvish medicines soon, he'll presumably revert to his dark flubber form, and that would be terribly inconvenient, since it would basically give the whole game away. But the problem is, how are they going to get him elvish medicine? Here they are in the mountains around Mordor. The show is completely unaware of any elvish populations further west than Eregion. He is severely severely wounded, and the Númenóreans have already left, so there's no chance of taking him on the relative safety of a ship. So they ride a man who appears to have been stabbed through a kidney, and perhaps also a lung, from which wound he is bleeding heavily, a wound which we have just been told has gone sour, so sour it can only be healed by elvish medicine, which pains him even as he mounts the horse. Nah, he's going to ride with that to a region, some 650 miles away as the crow flies. Fuck you, show. While they're spending what should be several weeks, but what the show considers a couple of days on said ride, we make a brief stop over with the dwarves, where Meghan Markle tries to seemingly poison Prince Harry's mind against the king in a way season 2 will completely overlook.
It's your father's. He's grown too old, too suspicious. His mind too feeble, his eyes too dim to see that no matter how many crests he hurls to the floor, one day this will be your kingdom. Durin the Fourth's, not your brother's, not some other dwarf lord's, yours and mine. And together we will rule this mountain and all others before our time is done.
You're sounding a little bit evil here, Meghan Markle. Your eyes are Sith yellow. I think the other dwarf lords might have something to say about you taking over their kingdoms. And this isn't how you're going to be characterized going forward. This scene threatens to undo the solid premise I set out earlier. If you want to convey that the rings bring about a fundamental change in the moral character of the dwarves, as you should, then you really need to not anticipate that by having Meghan Markle preempt the change in her attitude toward the Mithril. Either the Mithril is the source of the moral change, or the rings will be. Running with either as or when it suits you is a terrible way to invest either with its requisite import. And anyway, the real strength of the earlier scene stemmed from Prince Harry's care for young Ned, not his lust for material gain. This scene accomplishes just so much less than nothing, but that's because it's not really here to illustrate anything on a character level. The characters are the excuse for one of the show's most egregious instances of key jangling so far. Once again, fuck you, show. We're in the Second Age. The Balrog doesn't wake up until the year 1980 of the Third Age. You are several thousand years premature. What's it even doing down there if it's been awake the whole time? It's meant to be hibernating. If it's already awake, what is it waiting for? Why isn't it doing stuff? This is just all manner of fucking dumb. And somehow episode 7 isn't quite done with that yet. Not done with the dumb, oh no. It has one more egg of solid fuck to lay before it's all over, as we hop back to the Southlands, where Adar does what many conquerors do and decides to rename his new lands. But I wonder what this new place could possibly be called. A land of dark evil, protected by mountains that look kinda like a square on the map, with a giant volcano in the middle, where lots of orcs live. Nah, it's just not ringing any bells. I'm genuinely stuck. What could it possibly be?